All right. Flagpole Franny. Woohoo! Okay. She's a nut, this Flagpole Franny. Flagpole Franny is a supermodel from India. She started off as an exotic dancer, and then she started getting lots of Instagram likes. So now she's a world famous supermodel with penthouses in New York and France and all that. More well known than Kardashian or something. So here's the thing though, she misses her pole dancing days. So when she travels, she finds herself lingering near flagpoles. And when she gets caught out, trying to get her groove back and dance along the pole or whatever, she kind of pretends to be interested in flagpoles and things. So the lesson of this story is going to be that explanation is asymmetric, right? A fact X explains a fact Y. It doesn't follow that fact Y explains X. So as Flagpole Franny is lingering around one of the flagpoles, pretending to be interested, she actually does get interested. And she asks the question, well, why is I've measured the shadow, it's 20 meters long, and my explanation-seeking why question is, why is the shadow 20 meters long? And since no one's around, she answers to herself, well, the height of the flagpole is 15 meters. I know that there are light rays shining from the sun, and those light rays hit the flagpole, and I can see that the angle of elevation of the sun is 37 degrees. And, light travels in straight lines, let's say. And she's an ace at trigonometry, so she can deduce that the length of the shadow is 20 meters long. Right? So we can put this in the form of a deductive argument, and this satisfies Himple's model perfectly. Premise 1, light from the sun is hitting the flagpole. Premise 2, the flagpole is 15 meters high. Premise 3, the sun's angle is 37 degrees. Premise 4, light travels at straight lines. Hold on, I'm going to make sure I get this right. I don't know where that is. Sorry, carrying on. Premise 5, laws of trigonometry plus some calculations. Conclusion, the shadow is 20 meters long. So that the length of the shadow is the explanandum, and premises 1 through 5 are the explanans, right? We have derived the length of the shadow from the 5 other premises, including the height of the flagpole, right? Okay. Here's the problem. In this argument that we've made, we can flip the height of the flagpole with the length of the shadow, right? We can instead ask the question, why is the flagpole 15 meters high? That is, we can make the explanandum, why is the flagpole 15 meters high? Basically, we've just swapped out the details about the flagpole and the shadow. So again, we can derive as a conclusion that the flagpole is 15 meters high. So again, watch this, right? Premise 1, light from the sun is hitting the flagpole. Premise 2, the shadow is 20 meters in length. Premise 3, the sun's angle is 37 degrees. Premise 4, light travels in straight lines. Premise 5, laws of trigonometry plus some calculations that I don't know. Conclusion, flagpole is 15 meters high. Right? So we can deduce the height of the flagpole from the shadow, or we can deduce the length of the shadow using the height of the flagpole. So Himple's model works just as well, right? As deductive arguments, both of these work out just fine. And it makes sense. We could imagine a situation like, Flagpole Franny is too short to measure the height of the flagpole. She wants to know how high it is because she's suddenly actually interested in flagpoles. And she can run a tape measure along the ground. And with the other facts, then she can figure out how high the flagpole is. right? So inferences can run in both ways, but here's the problem. Explanations cannot. It seems counterintuitive. It seems problematic to regard the length of the shadow as an explanation for the flagpole, right? What explains the shadow? The height of the flagpole, right? What explains the height of the flagpole? The length of the shadow? That doesn't seem right. For it to be right, you would have to have a very, very strange and unique flagpole that had sensors that picked up on how long its shadow was and adjusted its own height in regard to the shadow or something like that. But barring that very unique flagpole, we think, no, that the explanation of the flagpole has to do with, the carpenter, the manufacturer, how far the steel beam was buried in the ground, the norms of how high you should fly flags, the zoning restrictions maybe, height of nearby buildings, something like that. So what's gone wrong here is that we've got inferences that can run both ways, but explanations don't run both ways. The flagpole isn't explained by the shadow. That seems wrong to us, right? If fact X explains fact Y, it doesn't follow that Y explains X. In other words, explanation is asymmetric. Hempel's model doesn't respect this. That's why this is an objection to Hempel's model, right? It's not a fully adequate account of scientific explanation if the criteria lets in things that shouldn't count as explanations. Now, you might say, well, look, there's this thing that kind of makes sense where we can predict the height of the flagpole. Like, that makes sense, right? We're using the information. You just said that flagpole Franny couldn't reach up there, so she used the length of the shadow. And so in that sense of predict, that does make sense. But it doesn't make sense to explain the flagpole's height in that term. Some people find the word responsible really useful here, right? You can say the height of the flagpole is responsible for the length of the shadow, but the length of the shadow is not responsible for the height of the flagpole. We can predict the flagpole height. We can predict that the flagpole height will be 30 meters, knowing that the length of the shadow is 40 meters, right? But the length of the shadow doesn't explain the height of the flagpole, right? The length of the shadow being 40 meters doesn't explain the height of the flagpole being 30 meters. One kind of really easy way to intuitively get a sense of what's going on with asymmetry is to consider Sneezy Steven here, who's like barfing up all this green goo. He's just a mess, right? He's sick. And, covering laws see explanations as similar to prediction. The only difference is what you do and don't know, but there's a mistake there, right? And it's easy to see when you think of the fact that symptoms can be used to predict, but they can't be used to explain, right? So if you have a disease and you have a symptom that's only from that disease, right? Only some disease has a symptom, then you can predict the disease. And maybe you can predict a symptom from having a disease as well. So I'm thinking of a disease maybe like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or Huntington's, where you're diagnosed and they're going to tell you what's coming. You're going to start losing coordination, right? So we can predict a symptom from a disease. But you can't explain a disease in terms of its symptom, right? Explanations only run from the disease to symptom. Explanation of what's going on with Stephen, probably we want to tell in terms of what little critters have invaded his body, and explain why his barfing up all this goo is an attempt to expel those invaders, viruses, whatever. Okay, so to remember the problem of asymmetry, you can remember the story about the Indian model named Flagpole Franny.